3. Wait, no, I did that. Wait, okay. We're live. Recording. Not live. I don't do it live. I'm not going to cut any of that. That can just be the intro. Whatever. Hi.
Seamless.
Welcome. This show was a mess. How you doing? I've had to restart my computer twice today, so that's good. Welcome, Alan Pope, better known as Popey.
Yes. Nobody calls me Alan. Everyone calls me Popey.
I was going to do some sort of nice intro there, but that's not going to happen now.
Okay.
Introduce yourself.
I'm a UK-based 50-plus-year-old nerd who has used Linux since about 1995, something like that. And I have opinions. And
don't we all?
Yeah, that's basically me.
Well, I guess we can just sort of start from how you got into all of the Linux space, and then we can get into what you've done as you moved up into more, I guess, positions where people knew about you. How did you get started in all of this Linux thing? Because 95 is a while ago, and I'm sure Linux was a very different space than it is even just in the early 2000s.
Yeah, so I used to work as a technician at a local college, and the first time I heard about Linux, one of the students brought in a stack of floppy disks and was like, "Hey, Alan, you need to see this thing," and talked about how he downloaded these floppy disks, and it was probably Slackware or something like that from back in the day. And I was like, "That's never going to take off. That's rubbish," and how wrong I was. And then a couple of years later, I think I saw a Coral Linux book in a bookstore.
Okay.
And in those days, you'd buy a big fat book, 3 inches thick, that had everything in it and included a CD inside the back cover. And I got that. And I had 2 computers at the time. One was a Pentium P200 and one was a P400 or something like that. And on the lower spec one, I put Coral Linux, played with it. And that was okay, this is pretty cool. This is a bit like the mini computers that I'd used at college. And I thought it was cool being able to use the command line and use VNC to remotely control it and all that kind of good stuff. And networking was interesting between these 2 computers that I had on my desk. So that it piqued my interest. And it took a while, but eventually I switched over full time to Linux in probably early 2000s.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So prior to using that, I presume you'd been using what Windows would have been current at the time? Yes.
Well, I've been around since DOS and my first computer, my first PC. Predates that. I had 8-bit computers
prior to finding that Linux distro. What were you running at the time?
At that time, probably DOS.
Okay.
Yes,
yep.
It would have been MS-DOS. And I looked after the networking stuff at the college. So Novell NetWare on the server and MS-DOS on the client. DOS. So and then maybe Windows 95, 98, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Well, yeah, now that I just realized it's a really dumb question because they were named the year they came out in that time because it was 95 and 98.
Yeah, roughly.
I don't know why I asked that question. I don't know.
Yeah, it wasn't like I was moving from BSD or I'd fiddled with OS2 and stuff like that, in the early days. But once I'd switched to Linux, I think I was using Red Hat initially. I think that was what I switched from Coral to Red Hat. And then at some point I switched to Debian because a guy in my local Linux user group suggested Debian was better. And so I was like, okay, I'll try that. So I installed Debian and I was quite happy with that. And then I got frustrated with Debian because I had a webcam made by Philips.
Okay.
And it was called a Toucan. I think it's supposed to sound like toucan or something.
Yeah.
But it was this weird beige thing with an orange surround around. If you do a search for Philips Toucan, Toucan, and the driver was called PWC. That was the driver that that enabled that camera.
I found it.
And the person who was the maintainer for that, for some reason in Debian, ejected it out of Debian. And there were lengthy threads on their mailing list about it. There was some question about the legality of being able to distribute the PWC driver. And so it became an out of tree module. And so every time I had a kernel update on Debian, I had to go and get this PWC driver. And, and so last night I posted on Mastodon a screenshot that I took. And it was the day I got my webcam working in Debian. And it's like a screenshot of the display and me going, yay, like this. So, I was that excited. But I got sick of Debian, and then I found out about Ubuntu and started trying that out. I think I tried Ubuntu in 2005, just after Warty Warthog came out. And then I've used it ever since.
When you mentioned Red Hat, you were using Red Hat at the time. I presume you mean Red Hat Linux, like the thing that no longer exists anymore.
Yeah, I was on Red Hat, and then I went to, I think Fedora Core came out around about the same time. I think it's called Fedora Core. And I was getting really sick of RPM stuff. I was familiar with DLL hell on Windows, and the RPM hell was not much better. So when my mate Hugo told me about Debian, it was the packaging thing that made me switch from Fedora Core to Debian. And I appreciate that things have changed over time, but that really tainted my opinion of Fedora and Red Hat. And so I've stayed with Debian based distros since then.
What was it that was going, like, what was it that was weird about RPMs? Because I don't know the story myself.
Oh, okay. So it wasn't so much, I think it was more to do with the way repositories worked back then. And so it wasn't so straightforward that you could just do, RPM install, whatever, like Firefox, although, that didn't exist at the time. You often had to go and get the dependencies, all the dependency RPMs, and you try and install an RPM and it didn't work. So you had to go and get another RPM. And then you imagine having to manually go and get every dependency package for a single package that you wanted to install. And if it was a big package and it had a lot of dependencies, then that was a lot of recursively going and getting, and then finding you're still missing something, and then going and getting it. And it just became frustrating and tedious to install anything that wasn't in the repositories. And there wasn't a lot in the repositories at the time. So it was often that you would go off-piste, find an RPM online, try and install it, and then you couldn't because some library was missing, and you had to go and hunt that down, install that, and then find that needed something else. And so there was this recursive, succession of RPMs you had to install, whereas Debian, the repository, was chock full of stuff. And I just didn't have that problem on Debian. So that went away for me. And I appreciate that some people, it was never a problem, or they built a mental model that meant I will go and get all these dependencies, or I know what to do in this case. But for me, it was just annoying. And so I just switched.
So if I'm understanding it correctly, as like a modern example would be like piecing your Ubuntu system together from just random PPAs online.
Kind of, but even PPAs have dependencies, and it's more like,
sure, but like I guess because there are the PPAs from like Pop OS, and then there's like Ubuntu ones, like using all of these ones from like these different SKUs of Ubuntu, where like you're not really sure if it'll fit together properly, but like you're gonna make it work somehow.
Yeah, we should talk about PPAs.
Sure, absolutely.
I guess the modern equivalent is like if you just removed the dependency tracking from Arch and you did a pacman install something, and it said, okay, I'll go and get that, and it goes and downloads it. And bear in mind, stuff took longer to download back then. Sure. So you take time to download, and then it starts installing and goes, no, you need something else, and then you install that.
So it's not dependency resolving in the same way
that was the main part. Is the dependency resolution was a bit rubbish, but yeah, once I switched to Debian, that all went away, and I forgot all about that, and I never looked back.
So what year did you switch to Debian, if you remember a roundabout?
It probably wasn't a lot longer ago than I switched to Ubuntu. So Ubuntu was 2005. So probably 2002, 2001, something like that.
Okay, so it's
still it'll probably be just after Fedora Core came out. whenever that was.
Fedora Core. I feel like it was maybe a little bit later. Fedora Core.
Could be. Yeah, I think Fedora Core and Ubuntu were like
I think they were about a
roughly
year
similar
apart.
times. Yeah.
Fedora Core 1 was 2003. Yeah.
Yeah, so that sounds about right. So 2003 switched to Debian, 2005 switched to Ubuntu. Sounds about right.
Yep. And then you found your way over to Ubuntu with... Were you using Warty Warthog, or were you using whatever the next version after that was?
Yeah, I used Warty at the beginning of 2005, and my local Linux user group that I was quite active in at the time, we would get together once a month and help each other out, resolve problems in installing software or installing a distro, that kind of stuff. And when Ubuntu came along, it made that whole thing a lot easier. And I think Ubuntu is one of the reasons why some of the Linux user groups in the UK, at least, died out, because there was a less need for them, because they kind of solved that problem of getting the software on your computer. There's still a whole load of other things you need to do, but actually getting the distro, the fact that you could ask for a CD to be sent to you in the post from Canonical, they had a ship it service. I used to have hundreds of them in the boot of my car, like a big cardboard box full of Ubuntu CDs, and I'd take them around and give them out to people. And I remember giving them out at Software Freedom Day, which I think is in September sometime. I was in central London walking around with some friends, and we all had piles of these Ubuntu CDs. And there was a big red London bus stopped at the traffic lights, and we went up to the driver and handed him, because he was a captive audience, he couldn't go anywhere, he's at the traffic light, so we handed him a CD, and he's like, oh, is this that Linux thing? And we were like, yes, it is. And he was like, oh, great, thanks very much. I was like, random bus driver knows what Linux is. It was quite eye-opening for me. I thought it was just for us sheltered nerds in our basements.
So sadly, the ship it service ended with, I'm looking at it now, 11.04. So a lot of people probably just weren't even using Linux without ever existing. Like, that's a long time ago now. It's 12 years ago. I certainly wasn't using Linux back then. I was very much in. No, I've only been using Linux for like 4 or 5 years.
It was interesting, and I know there were complaints from other distros. I mean, when you think Ubuntu started from 0 in 2004, and a lot of people were using Debian at the time, or Fedora, or Mandriva, that kind of stuff, right? There was a lot of distros, and everyone was scattered across, all the users were scattered across those distros. And when the ship it service started, it was really a blow to a lot of other distros, because nobody else could do this, right? You've got this multi-millionaire throwing money at Ubuntu.
I was going to say that it's not really like Ubuntu started from 0, because you did have Mark running the distro. So it's a bit different than just some like random person starting Ubuntu. If that was the case, like, it would have never become what it is today. Maybe it would, but like, it certainly wouldn't have had that head start it had.
Yeah, what I mean by 0 is, before 2004, there was 0 Ubuntu users.
Oh, sure.
It didn't exist, right?
No, fair enough.
But the adoption curve was probably sharper upwards for Ubuntu than it was for anything else. And yes, having Mark, throwing his, I think someone from Mandriva called it his magic box of shiny coins. I remember that phrase on someone's blog post, like talking about how Ubuntu is crushing all the other distros in terms of adoption because of Mark's magic box of shiny coins. And it's true. He could fund developer summits. So every 6 months, we would all get together, including people from the community, and all the Canonical employees would get together and work on Ubuntu and plan the next release. And there was stuff that just, Red Hat had a lot of money, but they spent it in different ways, right?
Yeah. Red Hat was trying to compete more with, in that grow, like at the time, the server space was sort of growing massively after, the web crash and then the sudden rebuild and what it is today.
And I've used Red Hat in corporate environments. Like before I did Linux, I was a SAP consultant. So I was managing SAP systems, and a lot of them were running on Linux and Oracle databases with Red Hat Linux, and so I've used a lot of Red Hat in the corporate space, and it's big. There's a lot of people who use it there, but the adoption of Ubuntu was initially, very popular on the desktop with consumers and small businesses, small enterprises, and hackers, and you and me, us types used it a lot. So yeah, the adoption went up with that ship it service. That really helped, and it wasn't needed after 2011 when they shut it down. It just wasn't required because, well, it was very expensive. You imagine shipping 300 CDs to Nigeria or somewhere.
Sure.
It's a significant expense for the company that they could spend on other, like, developers or something else.
Right. Yeah, it's how I guess there's still a need in certain parts of the world, and it would be nice if that is something that is like financially viable to do. But it's not like the core audience needs that anymore. Like, most people who are in the position to be downloading an ISO, who know about all this stuff, most likely have a connection where they can do it. There is still definitely parts of the world where that's just not viable, and it would be nice if there was some way to, deal with that situation as well. I don't know if there's a way to do it that's not just doing it out of the like goodness of your heart, out of the sole need of getting things out there.
So the other thing to remember is back then, booting from USB was not as easy as it is now.
Right.
And internet speed wasn't as fast as it is now.
I had a 2 megabit down connection around that time.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Also, the ubiquity of USB devices. Like, I could just reach across my desk and find like 16 and 32 gig USB sticks just flapping about in the breeze on my desk.
I don't have one here. Oh, wait, no, I do. So, yeah, here.
There you go. You see? So now you can relatively easily download an ISO, slap it on a USB stick, and you can just post that to a friend in a foreign land.
That's fair.
It's not going to cost you a lot. And I think what Ship It also did was reinforce this thing that you have the CD, you install the software, and then you could just give the CD to somebody else. You can pass it on. You don't have to put it in your library of, shiny things. That
you have to put it on the bookshelf behind you.
Yeah, exactly. Among all the other tat that I've got there. You could pass it on to somebody else, totally. And I think, although a lot of people like me carried them around in the car boot,
the bus drivers,
there's still people, I see pop up on Reddit all the time, people saying, I was digging around in my attic and I found this, Ubuntu 606 CD or something. It's it's quite nostalgic to see those pop up as well.
I was not around using Linux back. I was like, what was I? I was 6 years old when Woody Warthog came out, so definitely not using Linux back then. I don't know what I was doing. I was a 6-year-old, probably eating dirt or something. But I've gone back like on a live stream and checked out Woody Warthog and checked out like what it really was like. Went through the install process, which is kind of annoying because you've got to like do some like fiddling to make the virtual machine even want to boot the ISO. You can make it work. It's just doesn't work the same way as like modern Ubuntu. You got to like force some older tech specifically to. I think you got to like force an older type of hard drive or something. Otherwise, it just doesn't want to deal with it.
Yeah, it doesn't know what SATA is.
Yeah. But you can get it to work. And I went through the install process, and it's, it's not modern Ubuntu where it's just click next and it installs itself. But it had that setup, that baseline of a simple, straightforward, just mostly click next. You've got to like change a couple little things, and it's good. And then when you get onto the desktop, like, it is that really disgusting brown color, but it's that sort of base of what you'd expect today. Like, if you've used modern GNOME, you can go back and use Woody Warthog, and it's not that fundamentally different. Yeah, it's like shinier, and the feet, it's all like, it works nicer, it's faster, but like it's fundamentally the same thing.
Are you saying Linux hasn't changed for 20 years? Is that what you're basically saying?
I'm saying GNOME hasn't really changed in 20 years.
Okay. So the thing that got me was in the early days, I say early days, the early days from my perspective, if you wanted to get a graphical desktop up and running,
Mhm.
you would almost certainly have to run some weird commands to give you mode lines for your monitor and to edit your xorg.conf, or
Mhm.
back then it would be called x386.conf or
Mhm.
something, before the
Up
xorg
until about
fork.
2006 or 7 when x86 decided, hey guys, you know
Yeah.
that GPL thing? Yeah, we're gonna make a new license that's not compatible with that. Let's go. I'm sure everyone will love that.
Yeah. So back in those days, it was quite manual to get stuff working, and I
Mhm.
think the innovation that Canonical had was they had a lot of people making sure that it just worked. There was a lot of
Yeah.
enthusiasm,
Mhm.
and people. I think there was even a laptop scheme where you could ask Canonical to send you a laptop if you
Mhm.
were a contributor, and so a lot of people would test stuff on a variety of laptops. Now, there's always going to be the hardcore nerds who have a ThinkPad, right? And Ubuntu's always worked really well on basically every ThinkPad from
Mhm.
back then, because that's what everyone had. And fun fact, it's always a good idea to keep an eye on the laptop that Mark Shuttleworth was using and the CEO Jane Silber were
Mhm.
using, because you wanted it to work for them,
Right.
right? And so often people would buy, well, what's Mark got now? Okay, we'll buy one of those, because that's the worst thing you can do, because then you get a monoculture of one laptop that
Yeah.
works. You end up being Apple Mac, because
Right. Right.
it works perfectly on one model of laptop and not on every other. And so when you build a community of people who are all testing on different types of hardware and reporting issues and fixing issues, contributing fixes, it gets better. And I think there was a real push to make sure that it just worked out of
Mhm.
the box. Now, for some people, it isn't going to work out the box.
Sure.
People who've got weird Matrox Paralia video cards, or like a Dell laptop with a Neo Magic 128 XD, or whatever, like wacky video cards that
Mhm.
were around in those times. Yeah, okay, not everything's going to work, but for the most part, like you say, you could boot the CD and you would get a graphical desktop at the end of it.
Mhm.
And that was for a lot of non-enthusiasts, like not people who run Arch these days,
Mhm. Mhm.
from nothing, but normal
Right.
people who just want a computer and they want a web browser and they want a text editor and an office suite, right? Those kind of people can't be bothered with all the faff of xorg.conf and ndis wrapper
Yeah.
and all the other basic bullshit that comes along with Linux.
Mhm.
And Ubuntu made that go away. Now, other distros also did that, and there were engineers who worked at Red Hat and worked at
Mhm.
SUSE and worked at other organizations. It wasn't, just Canonical, but what
Mhm.
Canonical did is put it all together in a package that worked, and I think that was the turning point, and that's what made a lot of people switch from other distros
Mhm.
to Ubuntu.
Yeah, for a long time, like before I'd used Linux, I just assumed that like Ubuntu was Linux. Like that's the idea that a lot of people outside of Linux space. It's changing a bit now with like the Steam Deck being a thing. So people have more of an idea that maybe Linux can be different things. But for a very long time, like the idea of I thought that the Linux desktop was just GNOME because that's the only sort of look at Linux I had from it. So and like that's just because a lot of people simply used Ubuntu, and it was such a massive, I guess, massive game changer to the way that people could actually approach Linux. There's this really old clip. I think it's from like around. I want to say it's around like Woody Warthog, maybe a little bit later, about this girl who bought this laptop. And it's like this anti-Linux news story where uh she bought the laptop and they were like the people at the store were like, you can use this for all your education stuff, and the network at her university didn't like support the Ethernet card she had in her system. So it was like this story about like they say you can use Linux for everything, but you definitely can't because weird internet stuff at the time. But at the end of the day, it was still she was still using Ubuntu like that. Like of all the things that could have been selected, it's Ubuntu that had been that centerpiece of Linux for better or for worse.
Yeah, and because nerds being nerds, they prefer David to Goliath,
Mhm.
and Ubuntu started off being David to Microsoft Goliath. And then it switched, and Canonical became Goliath, and all the other distros became the Davids. You had the, the Pop OSs and the Mints and all these other distros, which took a bit of Ubuntu's crown. I still maintain, and I can't prove this to you, but I still maintain that Ubuntu has more users than all the other distros added together.
Unless if you want to count,
sometimes it's hard for people to accept that, right? Because people often feel like, well, this is the distro I use, and my friends use it, therefore everyone uses it. They can't see beyond that. That actually, there's a huge number of people out there who just don't care about Linux, and they're not part of the community. They just want to use a computer. Much like, those of us who are fawning over the Steam Deck and the fact that it's got KDE on it and it's Linux and it's an amazing piece of hardware. There are people out there who actually just want to play games. And they actually don't give a shit about any of that.
That's why game consoles are still so popular. You just
plug
it in, works.
It doesn't matter to them. And I think one of the mistakes that nerds make, like I am a nerd as well, I'm not being disparaging, is that they don't look beyond the boundaries of their own bubble. And there are people out there who, in their millions, who use Linux, and the Linux they use is Ubuntu. And so, yes, they see Ubuntu as, well, that's Linux. That's what I use, and that is Linux, right?
Yeah, I've had an indie game dev on the show before, and he uses, I think, Ubuntu. He doesn't care about his distro. He just picked the thing that, would be set up, works, installs Godot on it, and done. Doesn't matter. Could use Manjaro, could use Fedora, could use anything, but it doesn't matter because
we used to have release parties in Ubuntu, and I remember being on a train with a friend going into London to the Ubuntu release party, and this was on the day of the release. It always releases on a Thursday, except that one time when it didn't. And we were sat on the train, and we got all our stuff with us, like a bottle of cake and some stickers and stuff that we were taking with us on the train. And at one of the stops, two guys got on and were sat nearby, and I overheard one of them say, "Oh yeah, it came out today. Are you going to upgrade?" And he said, "Yeah, I'll probably upgrade next week. Once it all calms down, I'll upgrade next week." And so I thought, oh, they're going to the release party because they're talking about Ubuntu upgrades. And I was like, "Hey, are you guys talking about Ubuntu?" And they were like, yeah. I was like, "Oh, you going to the release party?" And they're like, "Oh no, we're not. Like, they were literally just users. I think they were web developers or something, and they were on their way home from the office, and they just happened to use Ubuntu. They're not involved in the community. They don't care. Now, some people in the community would argue, well, you should care. You should care about licenses. You should care about privacy,
every single
software freedom.
Read every line of code. Read all the release notes. Make sure you know every line of code you're installing on your system."
Right. That's not happening. Right? That's just not happening. And so it was events like that. And also, on another occasion, I was standing outside a large exhibition space in London, and I had a hoodie on that had just the giant old Ubuntu logo, the yellow, brown, orange
yes.
And that's all it had on it. No words, just the big logo on this black hoodie. So you could see me from a mile away, right? And this guy who was having a cigarette outside the exhibition space shouted over to me, "Oi, Ubuntu boy." And I was like, "What? Like, are you talking to me?" And I said, "Yes." And he came over and he said, the conference center was being set up for the ski and snow show where they, they show off ski gear and whatever. And he said all the projectors and all the lighting systems, they're all running on Ubuntu. And he just recognized the logo on my jumper and just felt the need to come over and tell me that. And that's the thing. It's like, in the same way, like Linux is used in lots of places, and like you'll spot it on a gas station forecourt running the adverts, or where you see it in McDonald's on the displays behind, wherever it may be. It's in a lot of places. And I think the fact that Ubuntu made some decisions that made it distinctive and stand out, whether it's the logo or the color of the wallpaper or the fact that the terminal has got a purple hue to it. Those kind of things mean that when you see it in the wild, you know it's Ubuntu. Now, it's also Linux, right? But you see it and it's Ubuntu, right?
Right. I think the first thing that I notice whenever I see Ubuntu somewhere is you see the vertical bar. If you see the vertical bar, you're like, okay, this is Ubuntu's GNOME. I know what we're doing here.
Yeah. I quite like it when I'm watching a TV program or a YouTube channel which is completely unrelated to Linux, and the camera will pan across a workstation, and I'll be like, wait, zoom, enhance, is that like, and you could just spot that it's Ubuntu from a long way away, and I'll screen grab them and share them online or share them with people at Canonical because they like seeing that. They like seeing the work that they're doing being used in the real world by normal people doing normal things.
Yeah, I do remember that. Like, what show was it? I don't remember what it was, but there was an anime that came out like a year or so ago, and it's like in like one of the labs, just they had Ubuntu running on one of the systems as they were like doing their research. Like, oh, that's neat. And that picture like went on to r/Linux, got massively upvoted, and I think other people, it's not just the people at Ubuntu, but like the general community thinks it's kind of neat as well. It's like, look at this. Normal people out there know about Linux. They, even if it's just like a random thing, they like understand that it's used in certain contexts.
Yeah, everyone turns into Leonardo DiCaprio, that meme where he's going like that and pointing at the TV when they see Linux on the TV or in the cinema or whatever. It's quite fun. And just like I'm a bit of a nerd when it comes to toasters as well. And whenever I see a dual-lit toaster on a TV show, which is quite distinctive shape, it's a British-made toaster.
Okay.
Whenever I see one of those, I'm just like, oh, dual-lit toaster. And it's and I'm sure everyone who has a particular, enthusiasm will spot a brand or a product that they like. And so, it's expected that we would spot that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Have you seen Mr. Robot?
I have. I've seen the first couple of seasons. He was KDE, didn't he?
Yeah, I was gonna mention the pilot episode, the GNOME, an executive using GNOME. Like, I love that scene is so cringe, and I love it so much. But like that series, they use a lot of actual real things that people would use. Like there was one episode where Elliot just I think he grabbed he booted off a USB that was running Kali Linux. It's like, okay, that's an actual way to use Kali Linux. Unlike a while back, the Kali Linux devs told people to stop running it as like a desktop distro because you shouldn't be doing that. But like, that's running it off a USB, doing whatever Elliot was doing at the time. Like that's that's what it is. And there's like plenty of other fun little. You can watch that series just not really knowing anything about Linux, anything about tech, but when you do, you see a lot of these little subtle, nice things in there that it's just a nice touch of realism as opposed to like have you seen I think it was a Law and Order or CSI, one of those series where you have two people typing on the same keyboard trying to like crack the firewall or something.
Yeah. And they got weird IP addresses and stuff. It's funny, the style of display that you see in TV and film. Like I think people often refer to it as movie OS, as like some kind of mythical futuristic operating system. And a few years ago, there was a little skunkworks project inside Canonical to try and up our game in terms of making Ubuntu the movie OS that you would go to if you were making a film, that you would choose Ubuntu as the thing you would put on the display because it is beautiful and it has all the like the Matrix stuff and a terminal going and all that. It never went anywhere, but I think the idea was to have something that would be appealing stylistically and creatively to someone who was making a TV program or a film. But often they want it to be distinctive, or they want it to be different, or they want the the desktop to just fade away, because what they really want the audience to focus on is the email pop-up,
Right,
or
right.
the terminal output, or whatever it is. They don't actually want the background to be interesting and distinctive. They want that to just be not interesting, and you to focus on the elements that forward the storyline, right?
Yeah, yeah. The computers there is like as a utility, not the main focus. But
Yeah.
when there are those
My
cases like Mr. Robot, it is the main focus. Like you can have some cool things like that. Like what Ubuntu would be trying to do.
So there's my father-in-law used to work for a company that make ovens and microwave
Okay.
ovens, industrial ones,
Is this
right?
somehow related to your interest in toasters?
No, it's not. It's completely unrelated.
Okay, sure.
And there was an episode of Doctor Who that came out
Okay.
where the person that he travels with was stuck in a place where she was making a souffle in an
Right.
oven, and she was repeatedly making a souffle, and this is set like thousands of years in the future or something, and she keeps putting this souffle mix in the oven and keeps going through this process trying to get the perfect souffle. And I found out from him that someone spotted that the oven being used in this episode of Doctor Who was one of their ovens.
Oh,
And
that's
so
cool.
someone had screen grabbed the bit where it was most clear that it was their Millstream or whatever oven it was, brand of oven it was called. And they passed it around internally in the company. It was like, our ovens are so robust that thousands of years in the future, people will be making souffles with them. So, anyone who sees something on TV or film is bound to like resonate with a thing they recognize. I wonder if in the future we'll see, in Terminator 2, when John Connor I think he used like a Scion 3MX or something like that in order to crack a code in the door. Is someone going to pull out like a Steam Deck from the past and use that to hack into the Gibson or whatever? I think that's probably quite likely.
Yeah, very possibly. I actually do know that quite a few people that are using the Steam Deck as their main computer, which is not what I expected when the device sort of was first coming out. But considering what it is and the fact that Valve, Valve is losing money selling those devices and they're making the money back on, selling games because that's the console model. That device is really powerful, especially during that period where, PC prices were just absolutely through the roof.
So my desktop is a ThinkPad. My company laptop is a ThinkPad Z13.
Okay.
It's quite a high end, really nice laptop. It doesn't look like the old industrial design of a ThinkPad. Black plastic. Looks like something that was made in the Soviet era.
I
And
kind of do, don't they? I hadn't thought about that.
they do a bit. Yeah. And this one doesn't. This is really nice,
sleek,
like brushed
yeah.
aluminium, faux leather exterior, high resolution display, all metal, no plastic. Anyway, I have that plugged into a USB Type-C thing with 3 displays attached, and my keyboard and my microphone and everything. So if I want to walk away, I could just pull that one cable out and walk away. And I thought, I wonder how well the Steam Deck would work in that situation. So I grabbed my Steam Deck, which is there, and I just plugged the USB Type-C cable in the top. And obviously it charges, and one of the displays woke up and showed me the Steam UI. And I thought, that's pretty cool. So I switched to desktop mode and then rearranged all the displays and started installing all the flat packs for all the stuff I use on a regular basis. And yeah, it is totally usable as a desktop, comparable in performance to my ThinkPad. So yeah, it totally is usable as a desktop. And if I just left it there, and then when I want to go and play, I just pull the USB cable out and I can play games with it. It's an amazing device. I'm really impressed with it. I'm glad I got one.
Yeah, I'm in Australia. Valve's still not selling Steam Decks here. I've got to import them, or I've got to like go through a third-party seller. Everywhere except Australia. I know we're in like the middle of the ocean, but like Korea, they've just recently announced that they're gonna have like them in stores there, and Valve.
Sorry, I don't mean to gloat.
No,
but it's a
it's
lovely
fine.
device. You really should get one.
Oh, I should. No, I could go and buy one from like one of there are people that are buying them and then like, selling them in the Australian market, but there's going to be upcharges and all that stuff. I could go through the process of what do you call it? Like what do you call it? Package package forwarding,
shipping
whatever.
service.
Yeah. Man, I want one. I look, by the time I get one, it'll probably Steam Deck 2 announced. I don't know.
Yeah.
It does seem like a really cool device, though.
It totally is, and I think one thing that I was surprised how well it works is the immutable desktop side of it. The fact that I haven't really had any problems. People say, "Oh, immutable desktops are terrible because I can't tweak and modify it." I don't really want to modify my game console. I want it to work, and I want to be able to pick it up, press the power button, launch into a game, or resume a game I was already playing, and not have to worry about editing config files in etc or whatever it might be. I don't want to modify it. I want it to be a game console, right? And so I think what they've done with the way in which the software updates are delivered, I just get a little notification, I hit the button, it reboots, and I'm in a new version of SteamOS. That I've found pretty seamless. I've only had one occasion where I've had to hard reboot after a software update, and that's not bad. And I probably had to do the same thing on a Wii and an Xbox at some point, having to hard reboot it. So it's not unusual, and I've had it for maybe a year now. So yeah, I'm really impressed with it.
Well, that leads us into something that is the least surprising thing anyone could ever guess, and that's the Ubuntu Snap Desktop. Anybody who thought that wasn't going to happen, I don't know what rock you were sleeping under, but of course that was going to happen. Yeah, the Ubuntu Snap Desktop with the next LTS, I believe. Yes. Is that correct?
It's funny how that's all evolved over time. Like when I think the first time I heard of Snaps was when it was announced to us. When was it? Hang on, I've got a timeline. Okay, so 2014.
Okay.
In October, most of the company flew out to Washington for one of our in-person sprints, and partway through, we had some community people there. This was in the time of Ubuntu Phone, so we had community people there developing apps for the phone. So we already had a second package manager called Click Packages on the phone, right? And so it wasn't unusual for us to create a new packaging system. And there was a whole app store on the phone and all that kind of stuff. Anyway, we all got called into a room for a presentation.
Okay.
And the community people were told they're not allowed in the room because it was confidential.
Right.
And so we all walked in, and then we had to very embarrassingly boot the community people out of the room that we'd invited. Because this was all very secret. This is before any of the Snap stuff had been announced.
Right.
And Mark Shuttleworth was not in attendance. So he did a video call on a big screen where he talked about Ubuntu Core and Snappy. And initially I didn't get it.
Right.
And the people who were already in the little group who knew about this, because there was a small group of people who were working on this project inside Canonical. And those who weren't working on it didn't know anything about it. Those people were super excited, like really, really excited. And they could see how this would be a way for us to be the operating system on routers, set-top boxes, all that kind of stuff, with reliable updates, over-the-air updates done easily and automatically, just like you want on a set-top box or a router. You just want it to be up to date, appliance level stuff, right?
Yep.
And at that time, we weren't thinking about desktop. Desktop wasn't, it was when it was introduced to us, it was all about top of rack, switches, routers, all that kind of stuff. And it took a while before we started getting pushed to bring desktop applications to the ecosystem. And so,
when
that was
the desktop stuff start happening, if you remember.
So we started even before the phone was cancelled. So we had some of those Click packages. So if you think about all the apps that were on the phone, the calendar, the calculator, all of that kind of music app.
Mm-hmm.
We started making snaps of those.
Right.
And that was quite early on. So that would have been 2015, 2016, something like that.
Okay.
So at that time, there was no Snapcraft store as such. There wasn't like a storefront that you could browse. You know, like if you go to Snapcraft.io.
Yep. Were snaps
didn't
like available
exist.
to the public at that point?
Not
yet. Is it still like an
I'm trying
internal
to think
thing?
when. Yeah, I mean, the Snapcraft store was February 2016, I think.
Okay, so it was still in that like internal getting everything sort of ready stage.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't fully formed,
Right.
for sure. And most of the snaps were either servers or command line things, that kind of stuff.
Right.
If you go and have a look at archive.org and look at snapcraft.io from, I don't know, February 2016, something like that.
Okay.
There's a few little icons of the things that are in the store, and it wasn't a lot.
Okay.
And it wouldn't be a bunch of desktop applications that you recognize.
2016. Let's see.
And when then 2017 Canonical downsized and cancelled the phone. And so that's when all the click stuff basically went away. Nobody was working on that, and everyone was moved across to work on snaps. And they formed the Snap advocacy team, which was a bunch of us who were tasked with getting more snaps in the store and getting adoption of snaps. And that was mostly people who used to be on the community team were moved across to be on the Snap advocacy team. And so we would generate lists and lists and lists of applications on our wish list that we wanted to have in the store. And some of that was we would then just build the snaps and put them in the store. And some of it was us going and contacting developers and saying, please, could you make a snap of this thing? And that took a lot of time and effort.
Before you go on further with that, I'm looking at it right now. The earliest of the archives, you've like think Jenkins, HTOP, there's FreeCAD on here. And the website it tells you to go to explore the snaps is UApp Explorer.
Yes. So interestingly, Canonical have made app stores a few times.
Okay.
And in Ubuntu, back in 2010 and thereabouts, there was a desktop storefront called oh Christ, what was it called? Software Center. I think it was Ubuntu Software Center, right? And it was a thing. It was just like GNOME software. It was a graphical application, but it was designed in-house. Matthew Paul Thomas, MPT, designed it, and it was developed in-house, written in Python probably, and it interfaced to apt, and you could install applications. And it was when would that have been? I think that would have been before the phone or any of that. That would have been like 2010, something like that.
Okay.
And you could buy applications in there.
Okay.
And developers could submit their applications to go into the store. But these were debs. And this was a really tricky thing to do. Like if a developer who was like, I don't know, making a game or a simple application, Debian packaging is not straightforward. And so getting their application into the store so that someone could buy it, you had to get the packaging done, and Canonical might help you with that. But every time there was a new release of Ubuntu, that packaging had to be updated because of all the dependencies have changed and version numbers have changed. And if you ever wanted to release a new version of your application, you had to contact this application review board who would review it before allowing it into the store. There were a lot of humans in the mix. Although I say a lot of humans, there were like 5 humans.
There were humans in the mix, which is a lot.
There was at least a human in the mix, which was gated your application and would review your packaging. And sometimes you'd have to do this round trip multiple times before you got your thing in the store. None of this upload and then it's suddenly available everywhere, right? It was slow and painful, but you could buy things and people sold applications. They were debs, right? And that was before the phone was even announced, before the app store on the phone was even developed. and there was a web front end to that, so you
Mhm.
could browse the storefront.
Okay.
But when the phone came along and the packaging system changed from debs to clicks, which were easier to create and didn't have to go through this manual process,
Mhm.
but there wasn't a web front end to it. And so in the
Mm.
community, someone made UApp Explorer,
Okay.
which shows what's in the Click Store on the phone.
Mhm.
And then later, when Snaps came along, they adjusted UApp Explorer because it was Snaps are an iteration of a next generation of clicks, basically.
Mhm.
And somewhat the people who made UApp Explorer modified it so that it could browse the Click Store and the Snap Store. So
Right.
that's kind of where that came from. And then eventually Canonical built the storefront internally.
Mhm.
And so the use of UApp Explorer wasn't needed anymore. But
Mhm.
that's the lineage of like Ubuntu Software Center with debs, the Click Store with clicks, and then the Snap Store with snaps.
Yeah. Before I redirected you, you were talking about you're building lists of software you want to see available on the Snap Store.
Yeah. So the when around about the time, and this may be coincidence,
Mhm.
but around about the time that XDG app was renamed to Flatpak,
Mhm. Which is a
and
way better name.
which is much better. Around about that time, I think we were in a company event in The Hague.
Uh-huh.
And I remember sitting in a hotel in The Hague in a meeting room where we were being told we absolutely need to focus on desktop applications.
Mhm.
Now, because the Snap packaging system had mostly been designed around small embedded devices like top of rack switches,
Mhm.
routers, and stuff, there were bits missing for doing desktop applications.
Mhm.
And so it was quite a task to get desktop applications packaged as a Snap.
Mhm.
And this is at the time, you basically bundled everything in the Snap. It took a while before we could break out stuff like GNOME libraries that were needed into their own what we call content snaps,
Mhm.
and the KDE bits into a KDE content snap. It took a while. And so in the early days, most snaps were quite chunky and contained basically everything
Mhm.
you needed. And desktop applications aren't used to being confined, or certainly weren't then. They would expect to be able to just write to dot files in your home directory,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
they would expect to be able to read from files in etc. And with the confinement that Snap brought, it made that stop working. Those
Yeah.
applications broke when we
Mhm.
snapped them. And so we had to jump through lots of hoops and sometimes patch the
Mhm.
upstream programs and provide fixes to Snapd itself. And so it was quite hard getting some of these applications packaged.
Mhm.
You would get into a pattern like you'd get a GTK3 app working, and then you've got a pattern there for most GTK3 apps, right?
Right.
Um, and then you get a KDE app working, and you'd get a pattern for doing KDE ones. And
Mhm.
then you get an Electron app working, and now we've got a pattern for doing Electron. So it was a lot of work early on getting the first, I don't know, 100 to 200 applications in the store. Once
Mhm.
you got past 200, 300, 500, the rest were a lot easier. And it was less about the technical, how do I get this packaging done? And it was more about the softer side of how do we get these people to buy into the
Mhm.
fact that as well as building a deb, or instead of building a deb, they now need to build a snap,
Right.
and they've got to upload it to the store. So they've got to build a pipeline to upload it to the store, and they've probably got to test it as well. And some of these developers just didn't want to do it,
Mhm.
partly because I've already got a deb. Why should I make another package? All the
Mhm.
Fedora people are covered with the RPM. All the
Mhm.
Ubuntu and Debian people are covered with the deb. I don't need this thing. And so it took a lot of conversations to fine tune the message that we would use to sell snaps to organizations. And
Mhm.
I don't mean sell as in financially. There was never any financial like incentive.
Mhm.
It was, trying to sell it as a concept of,
Mhm.
well, you could just do one package and it'll work across all the releases of Ubuntu and all these other distros as well. Was the one of the selling points.
Mhm.
And you're in control of publishing. You can publish it to the store whenever you like. Yeah, there was a whole load of advantages that we would sell.
Mhm.
But even then, some of them there's one very notable application you have heard of, and you may have also used, that when we first got in contact with the developer, it's a proprietary application that everyone knows the name of. And we first got in contact with them, and we spoke to an engineer, and he said, always remember this, he said, Linux equates to about 1% of my user base. You have 1% of my attention. And so when someone tells you that, like, it's quite brutal. Like
Sure.
when they say, look, you're just not as popular as you think you are, is quite harsh. Anyway, it took a year to get that application into the store. A year from first conversation with the guy, multiple meetings, multiple iterations of their application, and then it got published in the store. And now it's like one of the top 5 applications in the store. So, you know, it took a lot of work. And I think that's one of the reasons why snaps took off, for however you want to define took off, how snaps took off for the desktop apps, is because Canonical were paying a bunch of people to go out there and do this. And unfortunately, the other, you know, app image is basically 3 people going around packaging stuff, doing an amazing job of doing it. They got so many things packaged as app images, and Flatpak is a community of people. And so,
well, Flatpak
yeah,
nowadays also has the support of Fedora behind it. Like they're really sort of pushing that side with, you know, with Silverblue and all of that.
Yeah, but they didn't have people going out.
Yeah, it's not like they have that. Yeah, they're not sending out engineers to do it, but yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that helped us. Like, so I think the Snap Store's got like 5,000 snaps in the store now.
Wow.
And you know, some of them have a lot of users, like a lot, and that's great, and it's great. I can look back on that period, and you know, see the successes we had with some high profile applications and stuff everyone's heard of that's in there, and conversations we had with engineers from those organizations. And I can see that as a success. Now, you know, people in the Linux community don't see it that way. Sure, they see it as Canonical trying to build a walled garden around the Linux app ecosystem. Okay, like whatever. But it naturally makes sense with having all these applications packaged and all the frameworks packaged that you would then make a fully immutable Snap desktop. And this is not the first time this has been worked on. There's been projects inside Canonical. It was previously called Ubuntu Personal, was the name given.
Not a good name. I'm happy that's not the one they've gone with.
Yeah,
it's just a part of LTS.
They were trying to like brand it distinctly.
Sure, no, I get that.
Ubuntu desktop. But this was a while ago. This was, I think Ubuntu Personal was like 2016, that kind of era, and none of it was ready. Like, you just couldn't put all these things on the desktop and expect them to work, because it was all read only and stuff would just break. And so it would just, none of it was mature enough. But because of a lot of the work that the Flatpak guys have done,
with the portals and
like, all of that kind of stuff, that helps. So yeah, I'm not surprised that there's an all Snap desktop coming.
Well, to be fair, Ubuntu Personal isn't much better than the original name of Silverblue. Fedora Atomic Desktop. It's like short. It's not short. No, it's way too long. But it's very like, this is named by an engineer. It is what it is. It is Fedora. It's Atomic. It's Workstation. Like, it's fine as a name. Like, it does the job, but it's not like, you know, it's not Ubuntu. It's not this like simple thing that you remember. That's like straightforward, and it sounds catchy. It's way too long, and I'm happy that Silverblue was the name that ended up like rebranding that thing too. But I don't think that this the LTS actually has a name for itself. I think it's just like a stream of the LTS right now. It'll be like you can choose the dev version or the Snap version.
Yeah, I don't know how they're going to market that. Whether they'll put Snap in the name or not, because you know that name, that word is somewhat tainted among Linux people. Like, if the topic comes up, okay, there are toxic people in the community on our Linux who will just crap on anything that
on
Canonical
Pharonics.
Yeah, I mean, every
okay,
community
I want
has.
to be clear. The guy who runs Phoronix, perfectly fine. It's the commenters that are the problem on Phoronix.
Right, but how can I say this
Mhm.
kindly? If you don't get rid of shitheads, then your community is full of shitheads.
Sure, fair
right?
enough.
And that's what happens because if you just let people go wild,
Mhm.
I mean, this is one of the reasons I left Canonical.
Mhm.
Is I was just sick of all the negativity.
Mhm.
Like, we'd done a whole bunch of good work to get a bunch of applications in the store and recognition, and there were people out there who were grateful that they could just snap install Discord or snap install whatever application. And there's a bunch of angry nerds on the internet who would have a go every time.
Mhm.
And we would work hard. Like, we would work hard for like a year to get an application in the store.
Mhm.
And that company would blog about their thing and say, hey, our application's in the Snap Store. And the first comment underneath is, when are you going to have a flat pack?
Mhm.
And it's like, Jesus, dude, like, let them have their moment in the sun. They've done a
Mhm.
thing. They're happy with their thing. Just give it 5 minutes, right?
Mhm.
And there's a lot of negativity. Now, I can understand why, some people are negative about the things Canonical have done in the past, and
Mhm.
people have long memories. We could talk about that whole Amazon thing.
Yeah, that.
But that negativity gets to you after a while. And
Sure.
so
No, that's
I
fair.
just, I didn't want to do that anymore.
Well, I did want to ask you about you leaving Canonical, because I do remember that happening, and there's like a lot of people that took specific things that you said out of context, and this is why he left. He left because of snaps. He left because of this. So, if obviously, if there's anything you don't want to say, feel free to just skip it. But like, if you could just briefly run down what it was that was happening at the time that made you want to leave. Was it just the people being negative about it? Was there anything else that was sort of a problem there, or?
So partly it was, I felt like we'd come to a natural point at which the Snap packaging stuff was self-sustaining.
Right.
So it was, we'd built up decent enough documentation. We've got plenty of examples, no matter
Mhm.
what kind of application you built, whether it was an SDL game or a GNOME application or a KDE application or an Electron app or whatever. You could figure out how to make a
Mhm.
snap and publish it in the store, right? And we
Mhm.
had thousands of applications with many hundreds of thousands of users, right? So part of me was, okay, I've been doing this for nearly 10 years now. So I was at
Mhm.
Canonical for 9 years. I think I'm done with this now.
Mhm.
So that was part of it. And yeah, part of it was it's quite demoralizing every time you talk about your work to have angry nerds jump out of the woodwork and have a go at you.
Mhm.
And if I could understand if I worked for um Nestle and I was going on online forums and saying, hey, look at how we've taken all this water from this groundwater away from these villages and used it to make Coke,
Uh-huh.
or whatever product Nestle make. I can understand
Uh-huh.
if I worked for a super toxic, horrible organization
I don't
and
know
we
why you
made,
need to use the example of
like,
Microsoft, and that would be. I'm sure you come with a better example for Microsoft.
no, I was trying to think of something non-tech,
Sure. Okay. Fair
like,
enough.
what if we made, like, drones, or,
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
something with weaponized drones or hand grenades or something. Yeah, I get it,
Mhm.
right? And I get that people are super tribal. Like, if I worked for BMW, then someone with a Mercedes allegiance would be negative about everything I say. Yeah, I get that.
Mhm.
Like, but I think there is this um constant negativity in the Linux desktop.
Mhm.
There's a guy I used to work with, Michael Hall, who
Mhm.
worked at Canonical for a long time. And something he often says is, um, blowing out somebody else's candle doesn't make your candle burn any brighter.
Mhm.
Like, you crapping on somebody else's work doesn't make your work better, right?
Right.
And so when I worked at Canonical, we would always try not to be negative about the competition. And by
Mhm.
competition, like all the other distros,
Mhm.
we would celebrate a Fedora release. We would
Mhm.
tweet about it and say, congratulations on the release of Fedora, whatever, 35 or whatever. I wrote those tweets,
Mhm.
right? And I put them on the Ubuntu Twitter account because I wanted us to celebrate our friends in the Fedora community. I know people who work at
Mhm.
Red Hat who work on Fedora, right? I wanted us to celebrate their work. And that was not often reciprocated, in that we would be positive about other things and we tried not to shit on anyone.
Mhm.
But that wasn't good enough.
Right.
And I felt like people would constantly crap on Canonical, and I just got tired of it. And
Right.
I would rather work for a company who are making a product that the users of that product like the product
Mhm.
and enjoy using the product and enjoy telling people about the use of that project,
Mhm.
than someone where, if I mention the project, I don't know if it's going to cut the room in half, and half of them are going to start throwing tomatoes and half of them are going to be quiet. I gave a talk at a conference years ago,
Mhm.
and I asked people to put their hands up, like, are you using, have you heard of Ubuntu? You know, do you use Ubuntu? What do you use if you don't use Ubuntu? And afterwards,
Mhm.
multiple people came up to me and said, I use Ubuntu, but I didn't want to put my hand up because I didn't want people to have a go at me because I was using Ubuntu.
Right.
And it's like, that's a shitty position to
Mhm.
be in, to have people who are just constantly berating you for your choice of Linux distribution. Like,
Mhm. Mhm.
it's just mental. And so that was the main reason. I just got sick of all the negativity.
Right. Yeah, I sort of like it. It's fun to like poke fun at some of the fun things that have happened throughout history. Like I did a video about I don't know if you know this story, but back before the first release of Ubuntu, there was a couple of images included with Woody Warthog.
The
The
calendar,
okay, you do know it, yes. And I
the
went and did a
naked people,
video.
yes.
I went and did a video on that situation, and it's a fun situation from the past, but or like I've done videos like very critical of the way that Manjaro has run many of the things they've done, like shipping out many broken updates, shipping out updates for like Asahi Linux, like shipping out Asahi Linux packages without even remotely contacting the developer, not testing on any hardware, patches that could brick hardware. Like that's you don't want to be messing around with stuff with like reverse engineered beta software. But
Right.
I was trying to make it very clear in those videos that I don't care what you run. Like at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if you're a fan of Manjaro, if you're a fan of Ubuntu, if you're a fan of it doesn't like this is not the important thing about how you approach your system. If you feel like Popey Linux is the greatest thing ever and that does everything you need, that's fine. Go ahead and run it. It doesn't even remotely bother me. There's definitely I think it is definitely just that tribal thing. Like you'll see this in not just in tech, in really anything in life, that people tend to make whatever, especially a lot of like hobby related things, which is for a lot of people what Linux is, try to make these things like a part of their personality. It is a part of their personality that they run Arch Linux or that they run Pop OS or they use AMD cards or Nvidia cards or they use a PlayStation or an Xbox. But it doesn't matter. Like that's my main point here. At the end of the day, just don't get on like if you don't like what someone's running, like just don't use it yourself.
I completely agree. And the analogy that I often use is I don't know
Mm.
what oven you use in your kitchen or
I don't
what
know what
food
oven I
you
use in my
use.
kitchen.
And I don't care,
Yeah.
because it has no bearing on my life
Mhm.
how you heat your food or how you keep your milk cold. It doesn't matter to me, just the
Mhm.
same as I don't care what desktop you use. I
Mhm.
don't care if you use GNOME, KDE, Sway, or whatever. It doesn't affect me in my life in any way.
Mhm.
Um, but people, yes, people feel incredibly tribal. I mean, you could say I'm a little bit tribal. I've got Nintendos all around me here, and you know, it's just old stuff to decorate the wall
Yeah,
behind me.
yeah.
But yeah, I just don't care enough what other people. I would rather focus on helping people who have problems solve those problems on their desktop if they're using Ubuntu, because I know how to use that. I'll help you,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I have helped like countless people over the years solve problems on their desktop. In fact, that's how I got started with Ubuntu, is answering technical support questions. If you go to answers.launchpad.net slash tilde Popey, right? Answers.launchpad.net slash tilde Popey. You'll see a bunch of questions. It's a forum, a question and answer forum before Stack Exchange existed, right? This was how we did technical support. And if you scroll to the bottom, you can go to the last page and you'll find technical support questions in there that I answered in 2006 or something like that.
2005, how to mount the HDD. That is your first one.
There you go. See, and you'll find like some of them are brief, oh, you're holding it wrong, do it like this. And some of them are more detailed, go and get this package, compile this thing and stuff like that. And that's how I got started getting involved in Ubuntu, was answering technical support questions from users who had problems doing stuff with their computer. And I found that super rewarding. In fact, in Launchpad, you get this thing called karma. Every person in Launchpad has karma, and you get karma for answering questions. You get it for reporting bugs, solving bugs, committing code. It was like a motivator thing to try and get, like any of these, like useless internet points that get you nothing. Right?
Anyone who's used Reddit understands karma.
Yes, exactly. So the first Ubuntu Developer Summit that I ever went to was in Seville in Spain. And I paid my own way. I wasn't sponsored by Canonical to be there. And I was sat in a room with all these developers, most of which I didn't know. I knew them by their IRC nickname or their Launchpad ID. And I had spotted a few friends who I recognized from their little hackagotchis on their blog, right? And during the opening talk, one of the main guys got up on stage, Kiko, who was Christian Race, who was one of the main developers of Launchpad, stood up and said, have we got Popey in here? Sorry, my doorbell's just gone.
It's all good.
So Kiko gets up on stage and he says, is Popey here? And I was like, oh shit, what have I done? And I stood up and he said, this guy has more karma than anyone else on Launchpad. And because I'd answered so many questions, the algorithm was clearly broken, because I had like 1 million karma at the time. Now it ages out over time. If you don't add, it will age out. And I probably have only got like a few thousand or a few hundred now, because I haven't done it for a while. But what he was doing was recognizing that someone in the community was super active, and I got like a round of applause and the adoration of my fans in the room, or whatever you want to call it. But that felt really nice. Like I was helping people, and as a result, I got recognized in front of my peers and in front of all these developers who I respected, and that felt good. And I really enjoyed that part of Ubuntu, is providing help to people and it getting recognized. And I still do it now. I go on Ask Ubuntu and I answer people's questions. And I still find that a worthwhile use of my time on this planet.
Speaking of Ask Ubuntu, when I had George on, he told me about the post where someone asked if he was a bot. Because he answers so many questions as well that people just assume that it was just some bot answering questions.
I mean, you've met George. He is like a machine.
George ran the when he was on. He just ran the show. I didn't talk. He just went off.
He's great. I love George. So I worked at Canonical with George, back in the day, and he and a bunch of others started the whole Ask Ubuntu thing, and it's been great. If you search for a problem, chances are somebody else has had that problem, and Ask Ubuntu may have the answer.
Looking back through the questions you've answered, I see a couple here that really date the posts. Dual boot XP and Ubuntu, and the one right after that, dial-up connection. 2006.
Classic. At the time, I was working at on a contract in an office where I had no work to do. We were babysitting a system that was being shut down, and there was nothing for us to do. And so I would just sit there all day, and I had the option: stare out the window or do something useful. And I chose to do something useful. And so I started in Ubuntu contributing, and I got to know people by going to the sprints. And I think I had a few leadership roles within the community. There were a few committees and leadership organizations, and I was on the Ubuntu Community Council, which is like the top, hierarchically the top of the community. And in 2011 I stepped down from them because I was spreading myself a little bit too thin and I was doing too much. And then I got a DM on IRC from Mark Shuttleworth asking me why I was stepping down from all these things. Is there some kind of backstory? And I said, no, I'm just spreading myself too thin.
Doing too much.
Hey,
working too hard.
On that subject, we've got roles open at Canonical. Do you want to come and work at Canonical? And I'm like, I'm sat there. This is like dream job. And it would have been a career change as well, because I was doing SAP at the time. I wasn't actually doing anything related to Ubuntu in my job. But yeah, I had a couple of interviews just over the phone, and then I got a job offer, and my first day was flying to Florida to meet everyone at another Ubuntu summit. It was it was good fun.
Wow. So from there, you were at the. So, what was your position when you first started at Canonical?
So that would be in 2011. I was working on the Unity release team. So
again, that dates this as well.
Yeah. So we were working on getting releases of the Unity desktop out the door.
Right. Unity wasn't out yet. Okay.
Oh no, it was out. It was just new releases.
Okay, right. When did
Unity came out in 2010? I think.
Is that when Ubuntu started using it? When did they start using it?
Yeah, I think 10.10 might have had Unity.
Ubuntu first Unity release. Let's see.
Or 10.04. 10.04.
No, I don't want to know when it became a new flavor again. That's not what I wanted to know. Thank you. No, not the flavor. Okay, Ubuntu Unity is stealing all of my search results.
Do a search for Ubuntu 10.10 Maverick desktop.
Yeah, desktop. That's a much better search. Linux desktop, the last best Linux desktop. Now features GNOME. Okay, wasn't that one?
Oh, maybe it was 11.04 then.
Maybe.
So, but I started in November 2011, so it was already the desktop by then. Definitely, because I remember using Unity before I started at Canonical. So
it was 11.10.
Yeah, there you go. So I had a small team who were responsible for getting Unity out the door, and there were two versions of Unity back then. There was Unity, which we started calling Unity 3D, which is bad because the Unity game development engine is called Unity 3D.
Yeah.
In fact, they got quite annoyed with Mark when he called the desktop Unity, because they already had the name Unity. And then we developed another version of Unity called Unity 2D, which was written in Qt, with QML. And the reason for that was we had hardware vendors who wanted a more lightweight version of Unity, and Unity 3D was built on Compis, and so required hardware accelerated graphics card. That's why we called it Unity 3D, basically.
Right.
And the 2D one was written with Qt and QML, was leaner, but it used the same design. So it had the buttons down the left-hand side with the big button at the top left and the window controls in the top left and all of that, stuff. So they looked very similar, but Unity 2D was lighter weight. So when I first started, that's the team I worked on. But very soon after, I moved on to the phone team to work on the Ubuntu phone, which was still secret at that time. In 2011, it wasn't known outside of Canonical, and the only prototypes we had were running on, was a mock-up of the user interface running on a Nokia N9 and an Asus Transformer tablet, which was one of those tablets that like docked the keyboard and the screen. Was one of those. And I think it had an NVIDIA video card in it, which made it a bit of a problem. But those were the only prototypes that we had. And we worked on some demos for Ubuntu TV.
Wait, what is Ubuntu TV? That one, I don't know about that one.
So in 2012, so the idea was convergence, and we would use one code base for the desktop, the phone, and any other devices. And we had this idea that we could build an OS for televisions.
Okay.
And that you think about the Apple TV or Netflix, that kind of 10-foot user interface that you can operate with a very simple remote control with up, down, left, right.
I like the
forward and back, right?
As I was looking at the description of what this is, I just scrolled past the 10-foot interface part. That, I guess, yeah. Sorry, just a sidetrack right there.
I certainly did memorize the marketing spiel.
What is
that was announced in 2012 at CES, and so it got a lot of hype and a lot of marketing, but it was never released. It was never actually a finished product. The whole point of Ubuntu TV was to show it off at a trade show like CES and get conversations started with TV manufacturers and set-top box manufacturers in order to fund the development of Ubuntu TV. Like, it had a media player and a very basic user interface, but it was all a mock-up. The actual Ubuntu TV never actually was finished.
I found an 11-year-old video from Austin Evans showing Ubuntu TV.
Oh, wow.
This, it's just Ubuntu on a TV. You can see there's like movie rental stuff here. It looks like a TV OS.
So I can tell you what it was actually running on. It was actually running on an Acer Revo desktop, which was like this black and white diamond-shaped or square-shaped thing that you would strap to the back of a TV. It came with a clip you could clip on the back, and it had an NVIDIA GPU, but it was very lightweight, small. I think it had a Atom CPU.
Okay.
And it was running on one of those. It's basically a PC.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. But yeah, the TV never got finished because we just didn't get partners who wanted to put it on their hardware.
Right.
And so, a lot of people talk about how Ubuntu never finishes or cancels projects, and they cite Ubuntu TV as one of the things that got cancelled. I mean, I hate to break it to these people, it never actually existed in the first place. It was like a completely unfinished. There was a media player, it could play video files, and that was it. And all that was on the Ubuntu TV was a bunch of trailers and Big Buck Bunny, and I think that was about it.
Yeah, I'm looking at
we were really twitchy about playing trailers as well at CES. I think if you see any videos, it's probably you'll only ever see Big Buck Bunny playing on it. But that media player,
the one actually wait, I don't know if someone they didn't tell Austin about this because he's playing a trailer for the Avengers right now.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay. Is he doing it, or is someone from Canonical operating?
I don't know. He's recording it. Someone's playing it, but either way,
so I think we probably did sneak some trailers on there then. So that media player is the same media player code base that's in the Ubuntu phone.
Okay.
And so it was the idea was we would use the same applications written in QML using Qt on the phone, the tablet, the TV, the desktop, one user interface to rule them all. That was the idea, but unfortunately, it didn't go anywhere. And then the next year, 2012 was the year things started to go a bit south.
Okay.
Because 1210 Quantal Quetzal or Quantal Quetzal, or have you pronounce it, was the first release that had the shopping lens built in.
Right. Yeah. So I know about the shopping lens story, but if you want to briefly explain that one, I'm sure there's a lot of people that don't
Okay.
know about it.
Okay. So, in 2012,
Mhm.
we had conversations internally to revamp the dash, which in Unity, when you press the super key, it's like a search thing, right? It's that's what it's for. It's just like every other operating system does now. You press one button and you get a panel, right?
Yes.
Unity was one of the first desktop operating systems to do that. And what the design was supposed to be was
Mhm.
to search everything, like all your
Mhm.
files, all your music, all your programs, search the app store and search online.
Yes.
And so the dash had a concept of lenses,
Mhm.
and there was a main home lens, and if you just pressed the super key and started typing, it would search everything.
Which is how
And what that actually
Windows
did,
10 and Windows 11 work now.
yeah, exactly. And the same as on the Mac, if you do super space,
I haven't
it's the
used Mac
same
since
thing.
Snow Leopard. I didn't know it did that
Okay.
now.
Well, they all do it. Like
Yes. Okay.
it's spotlight search, right?
Mhm.
Um, and the separate lenses, if you press Super A, then
Uh-huh.
you only search applications. If you do
Right.
Super F, only search for files. Super M for music, and so on and so on. And
Right.
so
Makes
you
sense.
could install additional lenses, but all of the content was aggregated into
Mhm.
the main one, so that you could just press one button,
Mhm.
type stuff, and search. Right?
Yes.
That was the idea,
Mhm.
and the idea was for the the online search to be clever, smart in some way, in that it would give you contextual results,
Yes.
and something that was appropriate to you.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so, one of the things they thought we could do was search online stores for products. So, if
Mhm.
you press the super key and typed AA batteries, it would show up, all the search results for AA batteries with the price, and you just click and it takes you straight to the store, right?
Correct me if I'm wrong, but there was one for Wikipedia as well, wasn't there?
Yeah, there was a Wikipedia one. There was a whole bunch. We actually had a couple of developers who made a whole bunch of these lenses
Okay.
to like search all kinds of. There was a music store and everything.
Mhm. Mhm.
So that was the goal, right? And part of the problem was it searched Amazon. I mean, there's a succession of problems, right?
Okay.
It was on by default,
Mhm.
and it was in the dash. So when you pressed super, it searched all your local files, but it also sent those key presses, the search item things you're searching for, to a server at Canonical called
Mhm.
Product Search. And that then proxied those to a bunch of third parties.
Mhm.
One of those third parties was Amazon, and it
Right.
wasn't the only third party, but everyone calls it the Amazon lens or the Amazon, thing. But they weren't the only people that
Mhm.
the key presses were sent to. And the reason why it was proxied through Canonical was so that you weren't identified,
Right.
right? So that it could anonymize you, but also so that they could put some smarts in the Canonical side, in the product search side,
Mhm.
and maybe feed you different results or aggregate results from different places. So it could search
Right.
20 different stores and then show you the results together, right? That was the goal.
Mhm.
But a few things. One, it was on by default, and some
Mhm.
people don't like online search by default being on, right? I get that. The second thing is it arrived very late in the cycle. Like, so there's 6 months between one release and the next.
Okay.
And it was developed between two releases
Mhm.
and landed in October 2012,
Mhm.
but it was very late arriving,
Mhm.
meaning it should have been rejected and said, well, you're too late for this release. We're past feature freeze. We're past UI freeze. You can't land this. But there is a magic incantation that can be used to bypass the rules. And that is if Mark says so. And
Right.
so if
Okay.
Mark says, just do it, you do it,
Mhm.
because it's his football. He can take it away if he wants to.
Right.
And so you'll sometimes see in a bug report, or when some feature is described,
Mhm.
it'll say this is a mark ask, or this has been sabdeful, self-appointed benevolent detective for life. It's his nickname, right?
Mhm.
It's been marked or it's been sabdeful, meaning just do it,
Mhm.
right? Because powers higher than you have decreed that this needs to go in.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so it didn't have the same rigorous testing as it would have done if it had arrived on time, or if it had been postponed until the next release.
Mm-hmm.
And then people would have found out that what actually happens is the key presses go to Canonical, then they're aggregated and anonymized and sent to Amazon. But the problem is the results that appear in your dash, the thumbnail images come from Amazon servers, right? And so people were like, hang on a minute, this can tell who I am based on, my IP addresses, because the images weren't proxied through Canonical. The images came straight from Amazon.
Right.
So that was another problem with it. It was on by default, it arrived late, and the images weren't proxied, and they came straight from Amazon. And it never really lived up to the promise. It never really gained the intelligence to be contextual search. And also it sometimes failed. It would show unsavory results sometimes.
There was the issue
Amazon
with
have unsavory things.
The issue with it showing not safe for work content sometimes.
Yes. And all of that, very funny. Look, it's showing me a dildo when I asked for AA batteries, or because AA batteries appear in the search results for that item, right? And none of that helped. And so in December, so we're talking October is when that landed, and by December that year, RMS had made a video where he called it spyware,
right?
And the EFF blogged about it and called it Amazon data leaks. And so the end of 2012 was not pleasant, because everyone was hating on Ubuntu because of this feature. And so that didn't go down well, and it was very difficult to recover from that, because once you've got a leader in the, I nearly said open source community. When you've got a leader in the free software community like Richard Stallman calling your product spyware, and you've got a published blog on the EFF, it's very difficult to come back from that. And in retrospect, the feature should either have been removed and improved for the next release, or it just shouldn't have landed when it did.
If it was off by default, could go back. Then I don't think anyone really could have complained. Like, you'd have some people try to, but it wouldn't have landed as strongly if you enable something that searches Amazon and then Amazon collects your data. Like, you did that to yourself.
The switch to turn it off arrived even later, so you couldn't even easily press a button to turn it off immediately.
From my understanding,
one of the developers,
the only way
added that.
From my understanding, initially the only way was to either remove the lens entirely, or just send Amazon traffic into the void.
Yeah, you could just sudo apt remove Unity lens shop recommended, or shopping, or something. It was called something like that. Yeah, you could just remove the package and it stops doing it immediately.
Yeah,
but the damage was done. So that was frustrating, especially for people like me who are the public face of Canonical. I remember vividly being in Copenhagen when the EFF published their blog, and I was at an Ubuntu Developer Summit, and someone sent me the link, and it appeared on Reddit or somewhere, and I was like, shit. And I showed it to the product manager who landed this thing in Ubuntu, and he was like, yeah, whatever, and just quite dismissive of it. And I thought, okay, great. So that whole debacle. So interestingly, it was switched off rather quietly, and what was left was an icon in the launcher on the left hand side, which was a web app. You just click that, and all it did was open Amazon with the affiliate link, the tag. You sometimes see people use Amazon affiliate links. It's just tag equals something, and that's all that icon did. But the guilt by association of having that Amazon icon in there, even after we transitioned away from Unity and switched to GNOME 3, because we had that Amazon icon in there, people still thought that key presses are being sent to Amazon, and it's spyware, because they didn't realize that what that icon was just literally a web app that was just opened Amazon. Yeah. Some of us lobbied internally to get that icon removed, and
that was there
we did
till 2004.
Yep.
Jeez.
I was the one who asked to have it removed in 2004.
And removed in 2004 and 1804 LTS. Jesus.
And as soon as I asked the director of desktop to do it, he was like, "Yep, totally." And he went to an engineer and said, "Could you do this?" And he's like, "I'm on it straight away." And they just did it straight away, because everyone knew how toxic that icon is. Like, even if you look at Dell marketing material that would show a Dell XPS 13, it would show the Ubuntu desktop and the Amazon icon is blurred out. Like, nobody wants that there. Like, but the fact is, it made money. And so for years, if you said to leadership, "We need to get rid of all this Amazon integration," they would say, "Okay, how are you going to make money with the desktop then? What are you going to replace that with that makes money, that pays the engineers that work on Ubuntu desktop?" And I know there's this prevailing feeling that Ubuntu doesn't make money off the desktop. That's wrong. It does. Desktop is profitable. And people thought that icon didn't make any money. It did. It did make money. But after a while, it was taken away. And but like I said, the damage was done. So it's very difficult to come back from that.
So would you say that situations like that happening for nearly 8 years is probably, part of why people have this like negative reaction to what snaps are doing, because it's all coming from Canonical. So even though it's not even remotely related, there's a lot of people that have this like, I guess negative impression.
Long memories?
Yeah, they have this negative impression, long memories of Canonical, and because of that, then like I don't like snaps because I really hate the loopback devices. I know you can hide them, whatever. That's my personal reason. Snaps are fine for anything else, but like I have a distinct hatred for when I run LSBLK for the loopback devices to be there. But do you think that was definitely a part of it? The just Canonical being weird about not wanting to get rid of this?
I think the image of Canonical was certainly tarnished by the Amazon shopping lens stuff. I think there was a resurgence of popularity of Canonical in 2013. So in 2013, the Ubuntu phone was announced, and Ubuntu for Android was announced, and some people saw these as interesting, technologies. And in July of 2013, there was a crowdfund campaign for the Ubuntu Edge phone. Are you aware of that crowdfunding campaign?
I don't think
if you do Ubuntu Edge Indiegogo, you'll find it.
Edge Indiegogo. Here we go.
So what this was a crowdfunding campaign to build a device, a phone, and the goal was $32 million, which was quite a big ask for an Indiegogo campaign.
Yeah, they got 19. Well, this is Australian dollars. I don't know what it is in American dollars.
12 million US. They got.
Yeah, in real money.
10 million British pounds. Yes. So it's a funny story about that, actually. They had 2 engineering samples of the phone, and the phone was pretty small. Like if you look at like a modern iPhone, it was probably about this big, not anything like current size, and it was a pretty little device. The device didn't exist. There was only an engineering sample. It had no electronics in it at all. It was just weighted.
It looks
so
it's a sleek render.
Yeah. And there were 2 physical ones. I know because I had them, and I had to transport them to America in my hand luggage because I was going to a conference at which this project was being launched. So they were very expensive, those engineering samples, and I was paranoid that it was going to get lost in my luggage, or that my hand luggage would get searched and they'd take them away. But we launched that campaign. Yeah, it failed in the August, and maybe it was a bit too ambitious. Some people say that it was just a fishing expedition and there was no intention of ever making that device. I don't know what was in the mind of Mark Shuttleworth when he came up with the idea to do that, but it wasn't cheap. There was a whole load of marketing around this. They got the engineering samples made. And at the time, people were like, "Oh my god, that's a ludicrous amount of memory and a ludicrous amount of storage in
I'm
this
looking
device."
at the specs for it. I love this spec sheet. Mobile OS, dual boots, Android, and Ubuntu Mobile. Cool. Desktop OS, Ubuntu Desktop. No. It's like RAM, 4 GB.
The point was, it was going to be this converged device, so you could plug it into a display.
Right. Samsung ended up doing a similar thing years later. I don't remember what device it was
Dex.
with. Yeah, I don't remember when they did that. 128 gigs of internal storage. Wait, what year was this?
2012. 2013. 2013.
How
10
were
years ago.
How were they planning to do 128 gigs?
We just don't know. We just don't know how that would have ever happened.
Okay, sure. Right.
A battery life of 30 seconds, probably. So yeah, that failed.
Right.
But I think there was still some positivity around Ubuntu, even with the whole Amazon thing still going on. And we did actually launch some phones in 2015 and 2016. A couple of BQ phones from Spain, company out of Spain, launched the first Ubuntu phone. So the project, was popular with some because they felt everyone's moving to mobile. But a lot of the community didn't like that as well because we were taking our attention away from the desktop.
Right.
And so during that period, the Unity desktop didn't get a ton of maintenance, didn't get any new features. Like if you look at Ubuntu from 2013 and you look at Unity 4 or 5 years later, they look basically the same. There's basically no development going on Unity because it was all the developers were sidetracked on the phone, tablet, TV, and then snaps. So yeah, it's a shame because I really loved Unity. I really found it resonated with the way I wanted to use the system. But I think so there's a bunch of decisions that are made there, Amazon being one of them, which makes some people less trustful of snaps and the motivation behind making snaps, I think. However, you could also argue that the people who are anti-snaps are usually the most noisy people. For every person online who says snaps are terrible and I hate them, there's probably 100,000 people who don't have an opinion, don't care, and just want to be able to install and launch Discord and install and launch Steam and their favorite web browser and don't care, right?
Right. No, that's fair. That's definitely fair. There is, I don't know. It's fun to talk about this stuff from the nerd perspective, but I guess that is fair. That if this was if snaps were as unpopular as people like to make them out to be, Canonical probably would have dropped them years ago.
Right. And so when we were going through the process of getting more applications in the store, we shipped the Ubuntu desktop with a graphical storefront, GNOME software, right? It's a fork of GNOME software called Ubuntu software. And confusingly now there's a version called Snap Store, right? But it's basically GNOME software, right? And with the Snap integration, we can promote applications in the Snap Store. We could promote applications in the Snap Store. And when we were talking to software developers, one of the motivators would be, well, we can drive traffic to your application because if I put your application in the editor's picks, that banner at the top of GNOME software, I could control what was going in that banner. And if you give us some artwork and an icon and good metadata, we'll put your application in that banner. And every nerd will tell you nobody uses GNOME software, nobody installs software with a graphical tool. Everyone just uses apt or pacman on the
For
command line.
sure, yeah.
Wrong. Absolutely wrong. Because if I put an application in that banner in GNOME software, the number of installs just rockets up immediately within a day or so. And we know that because the Snap Store gives the developer, the publisher of an application, detailed stats of how many installs, which version of your application is out there, and what distro it's being installed on. And so you can see, you don't get the IP address or the user or any other details. And you get aggregated data about what region, what country they're in.
Yep.
But you get graphs that show you, and a little line on the graph that says, here's where your application was featured. And you see the line go up after that, right? And so that helped us to believe that there were people out there who would just install stuff. They go looking for stuff. You know how some people open the App Store on their phone or on their tablet, and then they'll see stuff and go, oh, that's interesting, and then install it, right? Same thing happens on desktop among non-nerd, normal people who open a graphical app store and then go, oh, that looks interesting, click, and I'll install it. If I don't like it, I'll remove it. But we can see the numbers go up when we put something in that place, which gave us the confidence that it's not the prevailing nerd opinion that snaps are terrible and Canonical are bad and nobody gets any value out of this and nobody wants this is wrong, right? It is wrong. It's true among a small subset of very noisy nerds, sure, but it's not consensus among users of Ubuntu. And being able to tell a developer that they can push an application into the store and that one application will work on 5 different releases of Ubuntu and Manjaro, Pop! OS, Fedora, Elementary, and all the others is a compelling argument. And so people would do it.
Yeah, that's fair. Well, since we're on the topic of packaging, I guess we've been on the topic of packaging for the past hour. You did mention earlier on about PPAs, and you know what? Before we end the show, let's talk a little bit about PPAs because they serve they still do in some sense, but they served a very important role of getting things into Ubuntu, like the AUR does on Arch, getting things into Ubuntu that just were not going to be packaged by Ubuntu or were not the most up to date, traditionally, like the Wine PPA, for example. Please don't install the Wine PPA nowadays. It's been deprecated for 10 years. Don't do that. It's still available. Please don't install it. It will break your system. But what really were the issues with PPAs?
So if you think of the origin story of PPAs, why they existed in the first place, right? So the Ubuntu repository is a curated archive of software. That's what it is, right? And there's a group of developers, some in the community, some who work for Canonical, who curate that. And every time a new release of Ubuntu comes out, they would curate the software that goes in. Some of it just gets imported from Debian, for sure, but some of it is managed by Ubuntu developers.
Right.
Now, as I mentioned previously and earlier, there was a push to get more applications in Ubuntu, but it's making debs is hard, and packaging software is hard actually in general, but making debs is especially hard. If you say that to a Debian developer, they'll tell you, no, you're just not reading the packaging guideline, which is like 500 pages long, right? But it's not straightforward. And so if you're a game developer or an application developer, you've generally got helper tools that will help you package for other platforms. But when it comes to making a deb, it's hand creating a Debian control file and a Debian changelog and a source file, and then figuring out all your dependencies. And it's just not straightforward, right?
For context, creating an Arch package, you just make a build script and then you just say like the dependencies you need and it's good. Done.
Yeah, it is a lot easier. But that meant that it was a bit of a hurdle to get packages in Ubuntu,
right?
And it was difficult for developers to prototype their stuff and get people testing their applications. And so PPAs were actually really, the goal of them was for a software developer to make a package available as a step towards getting that package in the official repositories.
Right.
It wasn't meant to be a permanent solution for you to distribute software. It was meant to be a stepping stone so that your software would become part of the corpus of software in the repository, along with everything else, and get maintained collaboratively by this community, right? But that's not what happened.
No.
What happened was people created a repository so that they could distribute their software, and then they stopped at that point.
Right.
They didn't aim to get it into Ubuntu. Partly because there's even more bureaucracy. Once you get it in a PPA, it's like, yay, I got my software out there. I'm done here.
Right.
I don't need to do anything else. Whereas the Ubuntu people would rather that went into the repository, or indeed it submitted to Debian, where the bureaucracy is even higher to get into Debian, right? And so people just stopped at that point, and they kept their PPA, and then they promoted their PPA. And then having a PPA for your software became the thing you do to distribute your software. And so it morphed from being a stepping stone to being the de facto way you distribute software for Ubuntu. Now, that's fine, I guess, but there's a few problems with it. Like, the first problem is you've got to maintain it, because every 6 months a new release of Ubuntu comes out, and all your users out there who are running a release of Ubuntu are going to upgrade in 6 months' time. And if you don't put a new version of your application built for the new release of Ubuntu in that PPA, then that package may just disappear from people's machines.
Right.
And so they were working fine one day, software that they installed 3 years ago from your PPA, and then they come to upgrade and your software disappears or breaks, and it's Ubuntu's fault because upgrades are terrible and they don't work, which is wrong. It's just that the developer no longer publishes that software in that PPA anymore, and so you're out of support, right?
With Fedora and their Copper system, they have a similar problem, but they also make it clear like what versions of the software. Like you'll have like the Copper packet is like, this is for Fedora 36, this is for 37. It's very clearly labeled like what this is going to work on. That doesn't really exist with the PPAs.
I mean, if you go to the web page for a PPA, you can hit a little drop down and it'll tell you what releases of Ubuntu the packages are for, but it's not straightforward. It could be better. Another problem is, as well as like the developer having to continually maintain that package over time, they could do something wrong. And when a deb is installed on your system, there's a script that runs before the deb is installed, and there's a script that runs after the deb is installed, and those run as root on your machine.
Right.
And so anyone who has a package in a PPA has root on your computer.
Right.
Now, that's a statement that Mark said years ago when someone said, "Oh, I don't trust Canonical." And I think his response was, "Well, we already have root on your computer," because every deb, when it's installed, the script runs as root, and it could do anything. It could do nefarious things. And there's no checks and balances on PPAs like there is in the Ubuntu repository. And so that's another problem, is it could do nefarious things. The other thing is people could just jam anything in a PPA. They could put a new kernel in the PPA, and if they put the version number right, it'll upgrade you to that kernel. The System 76 developers a while back made a PPA that had theme stuff for Pop! OS. And Ubuntu users were like, "Hey, I like that theme. That Pop! OS theme is really good." And they found the PPA and added it, and it broke their Ubuntu install. They like boot to a terminal now because the people who made that PPA, System 76, assumed that certain package states would be the case on the customer system. And that's true on a Pop! OS system. It wasn't true on Ubuntu or Mint or anything else. So they had to add a disclaimer.
The system D in this PPA. Yeah, okay, I can see how you can brick your system.
Yeah. Here's another example. A developer could just stop maintaining a PPA. In fact, the single most popular PPA, you can get stats for which PPAs are popular if you know the API. The single most popular PPA that most people have or had when I last checked this a couple of years ago is empty. There's nothing in it. There's nothing in the PPA because it was insanely popular because it distributed a piece of software that lots of people wanted. And then the developer rage quit and deleted all the packages from the PPA. And so all these systems are apt update, apt upgrade, and they're checking PPA for package updates. And there's nothing, literally nothing in that PPA. And there are thousands of machines out there checking that PPA, and it's empty. So they're not getting any new packages, no security updates for you on those pieces of software. So yeah, PPAs were great. It was a good idea at the time, but it serves a purpose.
Right.
But there are risks inherent with using them.
Like, I don't even know. Yeah, I I think one of the big issues.
Great, isn't it?
Yeah. No, I think one of the biggest issues with PPA is that the fact that it's not an Ubuntu system. Like, that's, if it was just for Ubuntu, that would make sense. But the fact that other Ubuntu-based distros are allowed to put things up as a PPA, like if we look at the AUR, for example, the AUR maintainers, if Manjaro came along, was like, we're going to put something in from Manjaro in the AUR, like, no, go away, package it on your own distro. Like, this is for Arch. Like, what are you doing? But
so yes, and that leads to an interesting conversation over a pint that I've had with people at Canonical in the past. Was so there are lots of derivatives of Ubuntu, like the popular ones that you know, like Zorin, Mint, Pop OS, and then there's 1,000 others, right, of these derivatives. But the big ones that people actually use are Pop OS, Mint. If you're looking at like numbers of users after Ubuntu, Mint is probably the next biggest.
I wouldn't be surprised.
And Manjaro, and then, but if you're looking at just Ubuntu based ones,
you said Manjaro. Yeah. Are you talking about just based on other distros? I thought you were talking about.
So if you're just looking at numbers, raw numbers, it's probably Ubuntu at the top, then Mint, then Manjaro.
Oh, you're talking about the biggest distros, right? Okay, I was
confused of all of numbers of users. But if you then look at just the Ubuntu based ones, then there's Ubuntu.
Okay, right. Mint, I was confused for a second.
Yeah, sorry. And all the others like Pop OS and all the others, and all of them ship pointing to the Ubuntu repository. All of them get, I don't know, 80 to 90% of their packages from the Ubuntu repository. The kernels, the desktop packages, libraries, languages, compilers, all of that kind of stuff. All the boring stuff comes from Ubuntu. And then the thin layer of thing that they put on top, whether it's the Cosmic Desktop or Cinnamon or whatever it is, and their additional applications that they put in that makes them beautiful and unique and whatever.
Yeah.
Those are usually in their own repositories, and those might be in PPAs or they might be in their own self-hosted repositories, right? And that means that all of those distributions are totally reliant on Ubuntu and the Ubuntu security team and all those community of packages who are building that software. And that comes with a risk that if Canonical make choices or Ubuntu makes choices, that breaks things for some people down the road. Because, and this is partly why the whole concept of flavors exists, like the Ubuntu, Kubuntu, Lubuntu. They're all built from software in the repository. There's no PPAs enabled on any flavors. So that if a developer in Kubuntu land does something that breaks Lubuntu, it gets fixed before release, right? Whereas if Ubuntu does something that breaks Mint, or Ubuntu does something that breaks Pop OS, there's no real comeback because you're building something on top of Ubuntu, but then you're putting your own special source on top, but you're not part of the family. And the whole point of being part of the family of a flavor is that you collaborate, you work together. And so, coming up to release day, when a new version of Ubuntu is about to come out, you'll see all the leads of all the different flavors of Ubuntu talking amongst each other. We need to update this package. You need to update that package. Let's coordinate. there's no coordination with the external third-party distributions. So yeah, if it breaks, tough shit, basically.
Yeah. 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 I guess that's part of the reason why with like, okay, the same sort of system exists on the Arch side as well. You have Arch doing all their things, and then you have like Garuda and Dev, or all these things that are just pulling directly from the Arch repos. I guess that it's not managed super well in every situation, but that's part of why Manjaro has that like layer between where they hold the packages and then send them out. It doesn't work in every situation when they don't test things properly or they hold things back that shouldn't be held back.
Yes, and Ubuntu has the same thing,
but they have a lot more people.
It's well, not even yes, people, but also process.
Right.
There is there's a web page you can go to called Pending SRU, and that is pending stable release updates. I don't know if you can find the URL. It's on, I think it's somewhere in people.canonical.com somewhere, but pending-SRU is probably the page, and it's just basically a big table. And it's a big table of packages that have got updates that are waiting to land in each version of Ubuntu.
Okay.
Right?
Yep.
And packages will sit in there until someone marks the bug as that they have tested it. And it can only move forward if it has been tested. It doesn't just bake for an arbitrary 2 weeks. It sits in there until someone says, yes, I have confirmed that this definitely works. And if you click through to the bugs, you'll probably find someone asking, hey, anyone who's experiencing this bug, we've pushed a new package, please could you test it? And then mark verification done. And when they tag the bug verification done, that allows it to then move forward. And so someone can come along and go through all of the pending stable release updates and say, yep, that one's verification done. We'll allow that one through. So it's a similar process to Manjaro, but with a bit more process around it.
There should probably be an end period where they clean stuff out, because there's one in here that's from 2,367 days ago. I don't think that matters
what
anymore.
What package is it?
BCMWL.
So the Broadcom wireless thing.
Yeah.
And
it's got like 10 different bugs attached to it.
Yeah.
What were you saying, sorry?
What version of Ubuntu is it, though? Is it a version of Ubuntu that we don't care about anymore?
It's for Trusty.
Yeah, right. Trusty. What's that? 1204?
Yeah.
So we don't care. Yeah, so someone should clear that up. So someone should just close that bug.
Yeah.
But, you know, there's a bazillion bugs out there. I created a bot on Mastodon, which uses the RSS feed. It's called Ubuntu Bugs. If you go to ubuntu.social/@ubuntubugs is the account name. And all it does is post a toot every time a bug is reported in Ubuntu. That's all it does. And it's quite relentless. Like, there's a lot of bugs. So it's not surprising that there's some that, you know, don't get tidied up, don't get cleaned up, that hang around for a while, for sure. But that's the same in every project. Like I still get emails about bugs that are reported in KDE like 5 years ago, or bugs I reported in Firefox a decade ago. You know, that's the nature of open source. Every project has too much stuff to do and not enough people.
Right. No, that makes sense. Well, on that note, I guess we should probably be starting to like wrap up the show, because I could keep this going for like another 2 hours. There's plenty of stuff that I've not even talked about yet. Like, I didn't even get into talking about.
I'm happy to carry on if you want to talk about, if there's stuff you want to talk about.
I want to go make some food. We can do this another time. Because I want to talk to you about like what you're doing now. I want to talk to you about Ubuntu Social, about, you know, about Ubuntu Mate. Didn't get to any of that. But you know, plenty of stuff for another time then.
I'm available anytime for you.
Awesome. I guess let the people know where they can find you, and if you want to talk, if you want to know where they can find you.
So I've recently started doing a new podcast with a couple of my friends. We used to do the Ubuntu podcast, and now we do a podcast called Linux Matters. If you go to linuxmatters.sh, you'll find our big fat heads at the top of the screen. And we just talk about stuff we're interested in, stuff we've been working on. It's not news. It's not argumentative. It's generally pretty positive,
Mhm.
and it's just us talking about the stuff that matter to us in the
Right.
Linux field. So yeah, feel free to subscribe to that. We're only on episode 4 so far, but we've also got a Discord and a Telegram channel and all that kind of stuff. If you want to join us, they're all linked from the website linuxmatters.sh.
Yep.
If you want to get in contact with me and tell me I'm wrong about anything, then popey.me has got all my contact details on there. Just go to popey.me. I'm Popey basically everywhere, except for places where some other prick has got the name Popey, and I've had to register some other contrived version of my name, annoyingly, like Popey DC, where the DC stands for .com, by the way. So if you see Popey DC, it's popey.com. Yeah, there you go.
I did want to ask you, like, how the Popey name stuck, because obviously it's, your name with a Y on the end, but, like, how did that become the name you used? Was it just, like, you didn't have anything, you're like, whatever?
So this started in many years ago. I used to teach training courses for SAP in the UK, and there was a Scottish guy called John on reception. And every time I come in the room, he'd go in a Scottish accent that I can't really do very well. You go, Popey. And he would call me Popey. And then one day I came in and he went, popey.com. And I thought that was quite funny. And I didn't own the domain. And he called me popey.com. And I thought, that's actually not a bad idea. So I registered the domain, I think in about 1998. And I've had the domain ever since.
Wow.
So what's that? Nearly 25 years? So 24 years I've had that domain. And yeah, don't go looking at it on archive.org. I promise it's boring. But yeah, pictures of cats and terrible iterations of blogs and stuff. That's where it came from. But it's quite funny when someone asks for your email address and they're expecting Gmail or Hotmail or something like that, and I say alan@popey.com, and they're like, Popey? What, like your name? Yes. And my kids have got an email address on that domain as well, and
That's
my
awesome.
wife, and so yeah, it's quite cool for them to be able to have a popey.com email address. It's very silly, but nerds, eh? What we like.
Was that all the things that you want to mention? Was the podcast and your website?
Yeah, that'll do.
Awesome. As for me, go check out the main channel, Brody Robertson. I do Linux videos there 6-ish days a week, probably. Sometimes I throw in some random other stuff. By the time this comes out, I'm way ahead in like podcast. I have no idea what's coming out. This will be out in like 2 or 3 weeks. I need to like take a week off the podcast so I can lower my backlog a bit. Because it's getting to be a bit of a problem.
What a wonderful problem to have.
Yeah, it's a nice problem. It means I can like take a week off and be good. I've got the gaming stream. That's Brody on Games. I'm currently playing through Yakuza 0, and I guess by the time this comes out, I guess Final Fantasy 16 should be out. So
wow,
come watch me play that, I guess. If you're listening to the audio version of this, the video version is on YouTube at Tech Over Tea. If you're watching the video and you want to hear the audio version, you can go to any podcast platforms on Spotify, Apple, something, whatever it's called. There's an RSS feed as well. Search Tech Over Tea, you'll find it on any platform. And yeah, I'll give you the final word. What do you want to say?
Lovely chatting to you. Thank you for giving me the time to talk about all kinds of stuff.
Yeah,
Thank you.
It's a pleasure to finally meet you after I've had conversations with you in my early days of using Linux. I probably said some really stupid things. But like,
we all do that.
Yeah, well, look, I've that what's that that thing where you think you know a lot when you're first starting using something? What's that called?
I'm not even going to pretend to know what that is, but yeah,
it's like the less
Dunning-Kruger.
Yeah, probably that. Yeah, yeah. That's I guess that's it then. I'll talk to you guys later, and I'm out. Sweet.